IndyCar. Does it need a new chassis? Does it need a new everything? Well, it's an interesting debate of that probably falls into that encapsulation of spec series versus non-spec series. So we're here to lay it out, start the debate, and then let you guys carry it on, as always, in the comments, as it's time for episode 3 of Outside the Tub. And obviously, Outside the Tub is now a very relevant name for this topic because we're talking about
the tub.
Well, yeah, as part of, obviously, the main thing. So, I'm going to set the scene for you guys. The kind of history of the kind of chassis through the series. Won't go all the way back, but we'll set the tone in kind of the heyday, the golden age. I would say probably for a lot of people would be the kart days through the 80s and early 90s in terms of popularity, speeds of the car and technical.
Just get into it, man. Just get into it.
I'm going to get into it. Okay, so back in the 80s and early 90s, we don't have the kind of spec series that we had there. Most teams would buy in their chassis from kind of manufacturers like Lola, Reynard, March from there. And obviously, if they had enough money, like the Penske's and the Dan Gurneys of the world, then they would be making their own chassis. So obviously, chassis development was a big thing in terms of speed and fastness of cars, and there was a lot of freedom development there, much like the sister series of Formula One, its European, I know, global counterpart, but I would say F1 is mainly grew from a European core. That at the freedom there. The big one as well was also the engine development. They had 2 engines, but there was also a little bit of issues and caused friction that probably led to the split as well, with some teams were getting better engines like the Penske's, especially when it got the Mercedes-Benz Ilma ones in the late 90s and going from there. The costs escalated massively, and that caused friction, which then led us to the split. And then you had the IRL, which was trying to cost cut and make things more spec, and then kart carried on how it would do it. Lola would stay with kart, and then it would be Reynard and then G-Force, which would be bought, by Panos, and then Panos would be the main ones going into Champ Car till its eventual demise in 2008. And in IRL, Dallara and G-Force were making the chassis from 1997 onwards in the series. Dallara would go on and win that battle, becoming the more competitive out the two, because as they became more competitive, more teams switched to the Dallara chassis because obviously they didn't want to be missing out. It turned out into Dallara becoming the only chassis within the series. And then in 2012, we had the latest edition of the chassis, the DW12, obviously named after Dan Weldon, sadly passing away in Las Vegas on the 2011 previous season before its introduction into the series. It has had updates since then, but no new chassis has been created since the 2012. Obviously, it's kind of almost like facelifts and upgrades to it. And obviously we've had lots of developments with the aero package that went between 2015 and 2017, made by Chevy and Honda, which was a failure in the end, which stripped back to kind of Dallara making everything on that, or a standardized aero package going there. And then obviously we've had something like the Aerosync going in. That is a kind of brief and very...
brief.
Yeah, that's a kind of brief, over the top, surface level look of there. But basically, we had freedom of build of chassis, then it got refined to just Dallara, and now Dallara hasn't updated its chassis since 2012. And it's a debate within the community of whether that should be updated or not.
Yeah, effectively, we are in a spec series at the moment in IndyCar. Obviously, the engines are different, but, a good large majority of the car is spec across all the teams. And of course, for one of the premium motor racing series in the world, is that the right thing? Obviously, the biggest thing to compare it to is F1, who have always been in development more for, the chassis, engines, everything, nothing spec. They're going basically in the opposite direction of IndyCar. And IndyCar's more like what F2 is, or F3 is just got it's a spec series, which is great for closeness and competitiveness. It's really the driver, the setup, and the engineers, on the race weekend make a big difference. It's not start of the season, oh, we've made a crap car, we've got to live with it for the whole season. It's every race weekend, any team can show up and nail it, which is great. But then on the other hand, you're not really reaching the maximum potential that you could be if you kind of let loose the reins of development.
Yeah, and I think obviously you still see the development, how it can make a difference between teams within IndyCar by obviously the real freedom in IndyCar is the dampeners, where obviously that gets to the mechanical grip and things. So you have like the Penske's and the Andretti's, having in Ganassi's as well, high end on there. And then you often find the lower teams having to buy in their dampeners or having a technical partnership with, I think, Meyershank, obviously with Andretti Autosport comes in there. But you see still in that aspect, the top teams come in terms of championships and Indy 500 wins. They're the ones with the best kind of dampeners.
Yeah.
In terms of that product. So you still see that freedom of development, what it can do in terms of spreading the field. But like you said, because it is mainly spec, that spread isn't too far away like we can see in like an F1 grid. I guess, Stephen, the question would be, does it matter of having a new chassis, of what it looks like, other than, oh, it's a new shiny pretty car? Do you think there is a absolute need at this moment in time for IndyCar to have a new chassis?
No.
And that's the answer. There you go. Debate's over. Stephen's laid it on the table for you.
Are you talking about like a new chassis spec for everyone, or are you talking about development?
I guess answer to both. I guess your answer would be maybe different to both. It could be no for both, but it could also be yes for one and no for the other.
Well, it's kind of, if you were to have a new chassis, or either way, development more, the ultimate result of that is going to be probably a faster car. And at the moment, if you compare it to F1, the best comparison is at COTA. I think that's the only real comparison we've got. IndyCar was 14 seconds slower than the F1 cars. So there's that's a massive gap in racing terms. So if you were to have a new chassis or development wars, you're reaching more to that high potential and speed on street and road courses. Obviously, ovals, you don't need to go any quicker. The spectacle is still there with what they're doing, and it's in safe parameters. It's just mainly the street and road courses, you could say they're lacking behind significantly.
Yeah, that's the main difference, because that's the crazy difference, isn't it? At IndyCar's top speed race, or races of Texas Motor Speedway and Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where obviously they are running the complete stripped down version of the Dallara chassis with the kind of the aero package is just down to its limit. It will run quicker than a Formula One car. Obviously, if you strip down a Formula One car to that aspect, it would be quicker because of the engine horsepower and stuff like that. But as things stand, if you compare the top speed of F1 and IndyCar in 2021, IndyCar would be quicker because of the speeds at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But yes, it's the road and street courses where it lets it down, and it's the kind of slower speeds and effects through there. The problem is, if you change, there are two big factors I think that you change, and IndyCar are tackling one of them, which maybe means the need for a new chassis and these upgrades that they keep doing is less relevant, because the hybrid engines are coming in 2023.
Yeah.
Increasing horsepower. And then if you increase the horsepower, that naturally increases like a top speed element of it.
Yeah.
The chassis allows that aero package to be built on, which is the cornering, which Indy cars can't corner as well. But then does that change the fundamental of the power steering versus no power steering? Would you have to start introducing power steering? And then these things start to all add up and get more expensive for teams, which I think is the main main thing holding it back at the moment.
Well, yeah. Well, we look at, we're going to make lots of comparisons to F1. How their development thing has gone has created cars that very rarely can compete with each other on race, wheel-to-wheel action. Yeah, there's some moments every race, but they don't nearly come close to the action that IndyCar currently creates with the amount of on-track battles. Because, prime example, if you saw the Mexico Grand Prix, cars literally couldn't get within a couple seconds of each other. It was just the packages that F1 have developed to have made racing the actual racing product quite poor. So if IndyCar start messing around with what they've already got a great racing product, if they start messing around with that, do they risk losing that racing product? And that's kind of its unique selling point at the moment, I'd say.
And obviously F1 have seen that and they want to go more that way with their 2022 regs, with making the, cleaning up the dirty air that leads. And that's still an issue with the IndyCar, I think, as well. I think drivers complain about the dirty air and what the current aero package produces, trying to limit the production of that. And obviously in 2022, there are more spec issued parts within F1. So it's probably the most restrictive F1 car there has ever been. I'm going to say that. Someone might correct in there. So in a time actually when the pinnacle in innovation in Formula One is going to more restrictive because of costs, I guess IndyCar would argue, or people for it would argue, there's still more lease for IndyCar to go without getting to the escalating cost of F1. But if we look at, roughly it's muted. I don't know, it's difficult to kind of get a price package, but they say the top teams in IndyCar to run a full competitive season is 10 million per car. All right. So if you were using F1 and saying a 2-car team, that is 20 million to run a top package. Obviously the Penske's, Ganassi's, you're looking at 30, 40, 50 million, maybe in the case of Andretti Autosport when they're running 5 cars, although that's come down to 4 in recent years. The budget cap in Formula One to make teams that was viewed as manageable and competitive was coming down over a 3-year period to 130 million.
Yeah.
So that is still almost 100 million more than the top teams currently spend within IndyCar. Because of those costs being so cheap in IndyCar, it allows more teams to come onto the grid. If you allow this free expansion and more kind of exposure, would teams like Top Gun Racing, Juncos, Hollinger Racing be able to, Meyer Shank be able to expand to 2-car teams, and teams be like Arrow McLaren SP be easier to expand to 3 cars and Rahal Lemon Lanigan? Would that be the case if you increase the running costs by allowing more freedom in research and development?
Yes. Yeah.
That would be the main issue.
Yeah.
I think whenever I see this argument in my head, the main issue that comes up with is money. And there isn't as much money in IndyCar as what there was back in the kart days in the 80s and early 90s.
Although it is increasing.
It is getting better.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But you don't want to get to the stage where it's getting better and then you cause friction between the teams again by having a disparity in the field,
exactly,
where you go back to kind of the racing car element of it. The argument would be, you keep everything spec that they have to buy and you keep everything manageable. Does IndyCar itself work with Dallara in just a complete new one that makes the aero screen more sleek, more kind of molded into the car? Because at the moment, I think they look cool cars, but it is very obvious with the aero screen that it is bang plonked on top. Can they find a way of better distributing the weight and getting more lightweight materials on a stock chassis? Would be another question.
Gee, another question?
Yeah, there you go. I've thrown it. So we've ruled out.
I was ready to bring this all together. And now
No. I've thrown you another question. Before we run in together, so we're throwing out the freedom of innovation. In
development more. No.
It's too costly.
Yeah.
But a new chassis, as in, it's been almost a decade. It will be a decade next year since a new chassis has been introduced by Dallara. Yes, it's had upgrades from 2018, 2019, and obviously 2020 with the aero screen coming in as well, and safety developments and improvement there. But should a new overall get in, kind of combining all these new safety features and finding a way of maybe making that a little bit more lightweight and trim to help the speeds and cornerings from that aspect be brought in? Should that come in?
Yeah, I think the aero screen is one of the biggest issues in recent times. It's really affected how the aerodynamics of the IndyCars work. So obviously you've whacked this big old screen in front of it, which is completely changing how the airflow works over the car. So yeah, kind of making a specialized chassis for the aero screen, for the hybrid engines, kind of makes sense as the right thing to do. Because obviously the hybrid engines are going to work differently to what they've got at the moment. So I think you got to make a specialized thing to fit all these the engines, the aero screen, like you're saying. I think there is a need to bring a new chassis in.
Where I will defend IndyCar, to go counterpart, I kind of agree there is a need there. But do you think IndyCar are just trying to nail one thing at a time? So changing to the hybrid engines is a big move for IndyCar.
Yeah.
And that increases their power. So if you change the engine and the chassis, they're two quite big things to change. I would say they are two of kind of the biggest things that you change there, because the chassis affects how the whole aero package works. So the aero would probably come into that, but as that's stock anyway, that doesn't necessarily matter. That's kind of involved in that chassis package. If you were to change two big things at a similar time, so obviously that engine's coming in 2023, could you have some real issues with the car? And I think maybe mooted a new chassis could be 2026, 2028 type of thing, with upgrades coming in that time. So before a new one. So you're looking at 4 to 6 years before a new chassis coming in, which is well over a decade. That probably is too long, but if they nail the engines, does that increase the speed of the Indy cars anyway? So therefore, one of the main issues maybe for it of not being the out and out second quickest open single seater out there.
But is it all about speed? If the cars, the thing is, if you whack the engine in and the cars just go quicker, could you then have the problem of the cars not being able to race together as well? Well, because you're still going to have the same issues that the current chassis has with the aero screen. So yeah, I can see your point. They just want to do one thing at a time. But then I also think, well, if you do the chassis with the engine and you do it together, it could work out really well.
It could.
Because you have more synergy. You go, okay, this is the engine. How about we're thinking this for the chassis? There can be more communication between the engine suppliers and the chassis, Dallara.
Yeah, and on a PR wise, like obviously we were at Silverstone this year for the British Grand Prix, and that was where the 2022 car was first seen, that you could physically see it as a fan.
Yeah.
It was kind of had its big official reveal that weekend, didn't it? So we got to go up close and go from there. As a hype thing, it's quite exciting. And we were like, oh, wow, that looks really cool. Actually, the car and, taking photos and everything. And obviously teams will change within F1. That thing, it won't look exactly like that. But the stock car, it builds a little bit of excitement and markability of going, oh, wow, this new car is thing. People are shallow. People like new shiny things. If you have an old thing, no matter how good it is currently, they kind of get bored of it. Even if you're like going, oh, well, we steal that new thing, but we've given it a fresh coat of paint. They're like, steal the old thing and go, give me something new and shiny. And I think that's where some people within the IndyCar community are with it.
Yeah.
At the moment. So rounding off this, Stephen, where is your rounding off thoughts of this debate of I guess the key words here is, does IndyCar need a new chassis?
Need? No, I gotta go with no. They don't necessarily need a new chassis. We've had one of the best seasons in IndyCar history in 2021. You don't really need to change much of that. But I think I don't think they need it, but I kind of would like with the new engines, just so I think in unison, new engines, new chassis, new era of IndyCar, bam. But do they need it? No.
I think the simplest way to encapsulate it is, are you a car-driven series or are you a driver-driven series? IndyCar for me is a driver-driven series. So for that, you're going to have a near-spec car, because you've got to make the playing field as level as possible for those drivers to compete with each other, haven't you?
Yeah.
If you go more freedom of choice and cars, there is the chance that the team with the most investment, you can say they naturally will get the best drivers, but you have an issue in Formula One where Mercedes have just dominated for near on a decade. Just about 8 years they've kind of won in a row. 7 years in a row. Apologies.
Whoa, predicting the future.
Geez, predicting the future. Red Bull have something to say about that this year to kind of stop the 8. But, that's a long time for a team to develop. And with Penske and how well run they are as a team, and the Ganassis, you could easily see one of those two get it right, they could dominate, and then that could make things boring.
Yeah.
In terms of it. So driver focus series from there, it's going, the need is the big one. They don't need it, but can IndyCar improve? You can always improve. You can always get better. And I think J.R. Hildebrand, I saw on Twitter, which I think led Champ Webb to maybe start a discussion, or he might have had the discussion before this, was going, what do IndyCar need to do for its next iteration of car? Make a car that every race driver in the world wants to drive. So that doesn't necessarily have to be the quickest, the most technological, brilliant. It has to be the car that I think combines the most challenge and, is hella quick as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, and looks really good, which, for the shallow thing, I think aesthetics do come into race car.
Of course.
People always like the look of that, liveries or just general look and feel.
Well, you have to look at it for like 2 hours.
Yeah. I don't want it to be ugly. Like those 2015, 2017 houses built on the back of the Indy cars. Geez, they were making a small flat block with go on there. But yes, okay. So rounding off, driver focus series, IndyCar doesn't need a new chassis, but could it use one? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And improve going forward. Can it always build on this momentum that it's gaining? Yes. The hot engines is a great step, but if they can bring forward those chassis development and do it at the same time, the engines, I think that time has probably passed now, unless they've kept this massively under wraps. But within a couple of years of that, rather than 2028, say so, that would probably be a better situation. But that's our thoughts on it. Very long one today, but I think it's such a kind of in-depth topic that you have to take the time to say it. You don't want to kind of necessarily rush it. So it's over to you. I'm sure this will cause plenty of debate and discussion in the comments of which side of the fence you sit on. And everyone always has ideas where you can improve when you're kind of outside the tub. Link there. But yeah, we can't wait to kind of discuss, as always. The discussions on the previous two videos have been brilliant in the comments. We've really enjoyed that. So can't wait to see you guys in the comments down below again. But if you're new around here and you enjoy these discussions, you enjoy the videos we put out, the kind of driver interviews, the feature videos as well, what can they do, Stephen?
They can like, subscribe, and ding that bell.
Ding it! But for now, you Indy fans, keep racing!